So as some of you know, Rabbi Flip and I were on a mini sabbatical this last week out of the country in Guatemala. And stepping away and having the chance to reflect on the news events of the week from outside of the U.S. gave us a unique chance to think about what our role should be as Jews in our nation at this time. I will not tell you how you should respond to events like the ones we watched on the news in Minneapolis, in keeping with our commitment to keep politics out of the sanctuary, but of course not out of the building. Please join us for Schmooze and Views on Thursday mornings at 10:30. But what I would like to do is teach a little bit about what our tradition and our Torah this week have to offer on the subject of welcoming the stranger, so that you might be better equipped to understand what it is you are feeling and how you might choose to act. The rabbis ask, which is more important, study or action? One rabbi says action, but the rest, the majority, insist that it's study because study leads to action. So think of this sermon as an opportunity for study so that you may discern any forthcoming action more clearly. On Shabbat, time itself slows down. We step back from the urgency and noise, from the week's headlines and anxieties, and we are invited to see more clearly ourselves, one another, and the world as it is and as it could be. Shabbat creates sacred space, not by building walls, but by opening our awareness. It is in that spirit that Torah asks us to confront one of its most persistent and demanding commandments. It is no accident that this teaching appears in Parshat Mishpatim this week, our Torah portion. After the thunder and revelation at Sinai, the Torah moves immediately into law, into the texture of daily life. Mishpatim asks, now that you have encountered God, how are you going to treat other people? One of the most repeated commandments in the Torah is not about ritual or belief. It is about how we treat other people. You shall not oppress the stranger, for you know the soul of the stranger, having yourselves been strangers in the land of Egypt. Exodus chapter 23. These words appear near the end of Mishpatim, embedded among civil laws about labor, property, power, and responsibility. The Torah is teaching us that the treatment of the stranger is not an abstract moral ideal. It is a legal and ethical obligation that is woven into the structure of society itself. The Torah repeats this mitzvah again and again. You shall love the stranger, Deuteronomy 10. The stranger who resides with you shall be as one of your citizens. You shall love them as yourself, Leviticus 19. Ramban explains that the repetition itself is the message. The stranger has no power, no natural protectors. If we do not act, no one will. And this command feels especially urgent right now. We are living in an age shaped by fear. Fear of instability, fear of change, fear that there is not enough safety or belonging to go around. Even on Shabbat, when the world is supposed to pause, that fear does not simply disappear. It lingers beneath the quiet. In times like these, the stranger is often transformed in our imagination from a human being into a problem, a threat, a headline. Torah refuses to let us stop there. Now, I mentioned that we attended this sabbatical. Well, the week before, I was at a rabbinic conference in Chicago, and a colleague from Detroit shared this story that has stayed with me. A new person had come to services at his congregation, sat in the back, was unfamiliar, as one might be, with the choreography of the service, having never been before, was really unsure when to stand and when to sit. We've all been there. At the oneg, which they had after the service, no one was really unkind to this person. No one said anything sharp or rude. No one actually said anything at all. And the next week, when my colleague, the rabbi, checked in with the visitor who had been interested in membership. The person said, "Everyone was very polite. I just didn't know if I mattered." Nothing cruel happened, and yet something essential failed to happen. Mishpatim reminds us that justice is not only about what we do not do, it is about what we fail to do when someone is standing right in front of us. Now, the Mechilta, which is a compendium of rabbinic stories and responses to the Torah, makes a bracing observation. The Torah warns us so often about the stranger, not because of who they are, but because of who we are. Mishpatim is deeply realistic about human nature. It assumes that when power shifts, even former slaves can forget what it felt like to be powerless. When fear rises, our moral instincts weaken. We justify language and behavior we once would have rejected. Torah anticipates this and it intervenes. Rashi adds a powerful reminder. When a stranger is oppressed, they cry out directly to God, and God listens. Vulnerability itself has a voice in heaven. Shabbat reminds us that God is still listening, even when we are tempted to tune out the cries beyond our immediate circle. The measure of a society, then, is not how it treats the powerful, but how it responds to those who can cry out only because they have no other resource. The Hebrew word ger does not simply mean foreigner. Sforno, a rabbinic commentator, explains that it describes the word ger, someone who lives among us but lacks the protections of belonging. Our Torah portion is filled with laws protecting the vulnerable, the widow, the orphan, the poor, because justice is measured not at the center, but at the edges. They are present, yet precarious. They are known, but unseen. On Shabbat, when we greet each other with Shabbat Shalom, Torah quietly asks, who among us is still waiting to feel that peace? Jewish history makes this mitzvah impossible to ignore. We were strangers in Egypt, but not only there. Babylon, Spain, Eastern Europe, North Africa. Again and again, Jews learned what it meant to live at the mercy of others' fear. And the Sefer HaChinuch teaches that remembering this history is meant to refine us, to soften our hearts, not to harden them. Shabbat itself is an act of remembering, and remembering in Judaism is never passive. And yet, Judaism does not pretend that this is simple. The Talmud teaches that the Torah warns against harming the stranger more than almost any other transgression, especially through words. Onat devarim, verbal harm, cuts deepest when somebody already feels exposed. Mishpatim, our Torah, places verbal oppression alongside economic justice, teaching that cruelty of speech is as serious as cruelty of action. Shabbat sanctifies speech. We refrain from creative labor, but also from careless language. In a moment when public discourse has grown sharp and dehumanizing, this teaching feels painfully current. Words can wound, and words can shelter. So welcoming the stranger does not mean denying complexity or ignoring real-world challenges. Torah is not naive. Mishpatim acknowledges conflict and disagreement and competing claims, but it insists that fear must never be allowed to cancel compassion. Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch writes that caring for the stranger is the ultimate test of whether a society truly lives by moral law. Shabbat offers us a weekly reminder of who we are when we are not ruled by fear or scarcity. And this mitzvah does not apply only outward. It applies inward, especially now. In a time when anti-Semitism is rising and many Jews feel newly unsafe, there are strangers among us too. the person afraid to wear visible Jewish symbols, the student navigating hostility they never expected, the congregant quietly wondering if the world has shifted beneath their feet. Shabbat tells us no one should feel alone at the table of rest. The Midrash teaches that God dwells especially close to the brokenhearted. Those who feel shaken are not on the margins of Jewish life. They are at its spiritual center. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel taught that Shabbat is a palace in time, and he also warned that the greatest danger to faith is not hatred, but indifference. Our Torah reminds us that holiness is not proven in moments of revelation, but in moments of responsibility. So the question put before us on this Shabbat and throughout our Torah portion this week is not whether fear exists. It does. The question is what we allow fear to shape, especially when we have paused long enough to choose differently. Will it shrink our circles or widen them? Will it harden our language or soften our hearts? As we leave the Shabbat and return to the work of the week, may we carry its calm into our choices. May we be a community that remembers the soul of the stranger inside and outside of our walls. May we guard our words, widen our circles, and choose courage over fear. And may we merit to encounter God every time we open space for another human being. Baruch atah Adonai, blessed are you who commands us to love the stranger, and in doing so, teaches us how to be fully human. Shabbat shalom.